Okay, in Chapter 7, Topic 2, Part 2, we're going to be playing around with negative exponents. So far we've learned how to multiply positive exponents, divide exponents. Let's look at a pattern to see if we can figure out how to deal with negative exponents, okay? So we'll start off with some stuff we know. Over on the left here, we know that 2 to the 3 power is 8. So it's 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, we know 2 squared is 4. 2 to the 1 is 2. Let's take a look and see if we can see a pattern here. If we get from 8 to 4, we're actually dividing by 2. Okay, from 4 to 2, we're also dividing by 2. So we think about kind of the pattern here. It looks like when we get to our next answer, we're also going to have to divide by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. Okay, let's keep this pattern going. 2 to this thing called negative 1. Well, 1 divided by 2 is just 1/2, so let's write it as a fraction, 1/2. And then if we divide 1/2 in half, we're going to get 1/4. And we're also going to get, for the last one, 1/8. So you can see that pattern of dividing by 2 each time. Okay, let's look at the 3's. 3 to the third, that's 3 times 3 times 3. That should give us 27. 3 squared, that gives us 9. 3 to the 1, well that's 3. Alright, so the pattern this time around, if you take a look, is we're dividing by 3 each time. Okay, so 3 divided by 3 is 1. 1 divided by 3 is 1 over 3. And then 1/3 divided by 3 is just like saying 1/6, or 1/9 rather, sorry. And then the last one's going to give us 1 over 27. So once again, we're dividing by 3 every time. Alright? So you may or may not see this pattern yet, but what we're going to say is, the conclusion is that x to the negative n power, so as a negative exponent, is going to be equal to 1 over x to the n power. And what I'm going to have you do here is, if you see this little negative n on your sheet, that is a typo, so I'm just going to have you scribble that out. So the conclusion is x to the negative n is equal to 1 over x to the n power. Okay, and as a similar pattern down here, 1 over x to the negative n would be the same as saying 1 over x to the n power, which is really just another way of saying x to the n. But we'll get to that pattern a little later on. This is the one we want to focus on. X to the negative n is equal to 1 over x to the n. Okay. Looking at the next slide here, I'm going to show a couple of examples before I have you guys trying. So here's the first example. We're looking at 1 over x to the negative 3. Okay, so in this case, 1 over x to the negative 3. The goal with this is to realize that the x to the negative 3 is really just 1 over x to the third. Okay, so what we're trying to do is take this exponent and bring it up so that it's positive. So when we're done, we're going to get an answer of x to the positive 3. Okay, over here, we're basically considering like this, moving the negatives on the top to the bottom and moving the negatives on the bottom to the top to find that pattern. So we're kind of going upstairs, downstairs, or top, bottom. The x to the negative 3 becomes a positive x third on top, and the y to the negative 2 becomes a positive y2 on the bottom. So we're just kind of like flipping and reversing. Okay, this one's a little harder. We have to kind of work with some of the information here. So we have x to the fifth and a y to the negative 2 on top. So I'm just going to rewrite the x to the fifth, but the y to the negative 2 is going to go down because it's a negative, as we showed in the previous example. But there is a y to the negative 3 already down here, so I'm just going to bump that one up. So it's x to the fifth, y to the third. You're going to notice that we also have another x on the bottom, so I'm also going to put that up top here. So we have another x to the third. Now what we're left with on the bottom will be the only negative on top, which is going to be y squared. Okay, and then we kind of have to technically keep going here. So this would be, because we have to combine terms. So we have x to the fifth times x to the third. Now we remember from our rules that that's adding, so that's x to the eighth. And then we have y cubed over y squared. Okay, so we learned with division rules prior that it's like 3 minus 2. So that should give us x to the eighth times y to the 1, or just y. Okay, the last one over here, the concept of negative exponents and flipping things is really the idea here. So if we take y to the third over this, it's the same to the negative 2 power. It's the same as taking the flipped version of this. So I'm literally just flipping everything on the inside and raising that to the 2 power. And then we kind of have to continue on with the math. So this one takes a few steps. Let me just walk through it. So this is x to the 1. The y to the negative 2 gets bumped downstairs. So that's y2, y3 squared. And we're going to be left with x on top, because x to the 1 is just x, y to the 5 on the bottom, and then that whole thing's being squared. So if you remember how we square the top, square the bottom, using our quotient rule from before, this is going to be x squared over y to the 10th power as a final answer. Okay, so you have some examples on the bottom, and you have some practice problems in the U-tries on the next slide. I'd like you guys to try those.